Homer Simpson is a millennial now. Ugh, just saying that aloud makes me sick to my stomach. It's like I'm going through all 5 stages of grief at once. But it's true. It is currently 2023, as of this video's production, and Homer is 39, meaning in the present day, Homer would have been born in either late 1983 or more likely in 1984. You know, 1984, the same year of the Los Angeles Olympics, the one that the Soviet Union boycotted, when Lisa was born back in season 4. Homer currently shares his birth year with his daughter. Kinda. How did we get to this point? How can a show stay on the air for so long that the father character ends up in his kid's original generation? Hell, even further than the original generation. I see you, Gen X. Has the Simpsons timeline always floated along with the current year, or is this a recent invention by modern era writers? And more importantly, is this even a good thing? If Homer Simpson is now a millennial, then, after all these years, all this history, do we really know anything about him? First, let's talk about the Simpsons floating timeline and figure out how we got into this mess. As we all know, The Simpsons is an episodic status quo show where the characters do not age. Instead, the world around them marches onward through time and trendy new pop culture references, while the characters largely stay the same. Unless you're Apu's kids, I guess. However, early on in the series, this approach created a problem. How do we deal with flashback episodes? Classic Simpsons is littered with flashbacks, often once per season. So the show had to quickly figure this out. And their solution? Make the flashback episodes float with the then current year. As proof, let's go through the classic era examples. Season 2's The Way We Was premiered in 1991. Takes place in 1974, when Homer was a senior in high school, presumably 18 years old. This puts Homer's birth year in 1956, making Homer 35 in the present day. It's worth noting that, although Homer started around 34 or 35, they did age him up over time. He was 36 in season 4, he was 38 in season 8, 39 in season 10, and almost 40 in season 19, where he seems to have stayed. Anyway, next up we have season 3's I Married Marge, also premiered in 1991. Takes place in 1980, when Homer says he was 24. This lines up with the first example, putting his birth year in 1956. Bart was conceived in May of 1980, so he was born in 1981. He's 10 in 1991, so this lines up well. Who says writers can't do math? Season 4's Lisa's First Word, 1992. Starts in the spring of 1983, over the course of the following year. Lisa is born during August 1984, around the Olympics. She's 8 in 1992, so once again, this lines up. Already, we're seeing the timeline float a little. Bart and Lisa are 2 years apart, and yet Bart was born in early 81 and Lisa in summer of 84. Not a big shift, it's still within reason, but we're starting to see the numbers drift apart. Then we have season 5's Homer's Barbershop Quartet, 1993. This flashes back 8 years to 1985, shortly after Lisa's birth. Lisa has bumped up another year. Now let's jump forward to season 9's Lisa's Sax from 1997. This goes back 7 years to 1990, with Tracy Ullman's crude animated filler and Homer watching Twin Peaks. Now, Lisa would have been born around 1989. I know this video is about Homer, and we're talking about the kids a lot here, but they're the perfect illustration of how it was always the intention of classic Simpsons to do a floating timeline. By seasons 4 or 5, they were locked into this being how their flashbacks work. Even shorter trips backward, like And Maggie Makes 3, adhered to this rule. However, after season 9, we saw a shift away from the kids' origin stories and more toward Homer and Marge. And here is where things got complicated. We already saw one timeline refresh with Mother Simpson taking place in 1969 during Super Bowl III. Homer's birth year has shifted from 1956 to the 60s. Mona's connection to this decade is a core part of her character, so her follow-up appearances got tethered to this point in history. Even a 2021 episode is referring to her going underground with hippies, albeit setting the story in a vague 30 years ago. After season 9, the writers shifted to using less specific timeframes for Homer and Marge flashbacks instead of locking into a year. The Blunder Years takes place when Homer is 12, but we don't know exactly when. It just feels vaguely like the 60s or 70s. In The Way We Weren't, flashing back to when they were 10, Homer actually jokes about how he's not sure what year it was. Unlike with Bart and Lisa's birth years, there seemed to be some resistance from the writers to untether Homer and Marge from their prom in the 70s. I think that's partially why season 19's That 90s Show felt like a nuclear bomb was dropped onto Simpsons continuity. Suddenly, after a decade of quietly ignoring the floating timeline, they went back to classic Simpsons approach. This episode aired in 2008 and takes Homer and Marge back to the 90s, right up until Bart was born. Since Homer is 39 here, this places his birth year in 1969. Ironically, the same year Mother Simpson was originally set. Homer has officially become an elder Gen Xer. Now, the exact time frame of this episode is super anachronistic, as Homer starts out in a Boyz II Men parody, and then basically invents grunge. And then it's already 1997, and Homer and Marge are conceiving Bart at mini-golf again. We now have this same scene set in both 1980 and 1997. Oh, also, fun fact, some of these fans of Homer's grunge music are the same people who yelled at him at Hullabalooza. I guess they just permanently live in the mid-90s music scene. After That 90s Show, they continued letting things float. A 2008 flashback to 5 years ago is clearly set in the early 2000s. A 2013 flashback to 9 years ago is in a similar early 2000s. For a while, we seem to have a pattern, where all of Homer's childhood and teenage stuff stayed tethered in the 60s and 70s, and all of Homer and Marge's relationship stuff floats. When I first looked at the Simpsons timeline, I once theorized that their senior prom was the nexus point of the whole thing. That this has always been portrayed as a 70s prom, and the moment Homer and Marge got together, that's when the timeline started floating. I blame Artie Ziff. However, since the release of that video, that theory has crumbled to the ground. In 2021, the episode Do Pizza Bots Dream of Electric Guitars aired, which featured teen Homer in the 90s working for this Chuck E. Cheese knockoff. We don't know Homer's exact age or year. We do know it has to be 1993 or later because he does a Whoop There It Is parody. Since Homer is 39, this would put his birth year in 1982. Maybe Homer was 16 and this happened in 98? To be honest, this feels earlier than that with the reference pool. But whatever, either way, we're already up to Homer being born in the early 80s. And finally, we have the season 33 premiere, The Star of the Backstage, also from 2021. In this episode, we learn that Marge was stage manager for their high school musical about the Y2K bug. It's not super clear whether this play came out before Y2K or afterward or what grade they're in. But come on, Homer and Marge are literally in school during Y2K. That experience is basically the beginning of Millennials. It's literally in the generation's name. I would guess that Homer and Marge were in the class of 2001 right here. I skipped a bunch of smaller flashback examples, as this wasn't meant to be a full timeline breakdown. But now you should have a good idea of how we got here. How high schoolers from 1974 ended up in a musical about Y2K. It's weird, but it happened. We just have to accept that's how the show is designed. But we don't have to be happy about it. That doesn't automatically mean this is a good approach to continuity. So did The Simpsons make the right call with their status quo? Or have they inadvertently made all of their characters' backstories arbitrary and meaningless? Okay, So here's the argument against floating timelines in fiction. The time period and setting is incredibly important in defining who a character is, their specific life experiences, the culture they lived in, and how that time period affected their decision making. Obviously, a mom living in 1920 would be written very differently than one in 2020, even if those moms have similar personalities and temperaments. The core character fundamentally changes if they live in a different year. For The Simpsons, we do have folks with very specific backstories that do inform their personality. We all know that Principal Skinner was in Vietnam. There are plenty of flashback jokes, and even a very controversial episode about it. We can look at Skinner's very orderly personality and say that his experience in Vietnam shaped him into the Skinner we know and love. There's explicit evidence that this is true. This aspect gives him considerably more depth. However, if you time shift Skinner forward in time, where he is now a veteran of the Persian Gulf in the 90s or the war in Iraq in the 2000s, does this significantly change how we view him? Does it have to be Vietnam? You notice that, as the timeline shifted forward, they stopped doing as many military references with Skinner, because him in Vietnam doesn't make sense anymore. By floating the whole timeline, they would have to keep refreshing these details for every character with a backstory. In addition to Skinner, we have seen Grandpa's World War II stuff float forward toward the Korean War. Because the timeline floats, it's often simpler to just let certain details fall by the wayside. We can't reference them because it's confusing now. As a result, characters can become more shallow and generic. They're less like characters and more like archetypes that got dragged through time. Nothing about Kirk's loser parenting in the 90s informs anything about him today. It's just, what if he was a loser parent in the 90s? What if he was a loser parent in the 2020s? There's no sense of history about him. He's just an archetype. On the other hand, The Simpsons has always been designed to be a status quo episodic show. This isn't a BoJack Horseman, where the events of last season will have grave ramifications on this one. That's not what we're doing here. That's never been what they're about. So there's the argument that viewing a Simpsons character as the sum of specific experiences is fundamentally the wrong approach. In my old timeline videos, I had fun twisting myself into pretzels, trying to make those little details work. But really, what we should glean from those kinds of analyses are the more general observations and trends. Looking at these disparate reimaginings, their full body of work, and figuring out how true the writers were to them. In The Simpsons, the world doesn't change the characters change in parallel to our real world. I think we're all used to this dynamic to some degree, seeing how other franchises have rebooted themselves over time, how Hollywood will come along and reimagine our childhood relics after we're done with them. The rebooted characters will be mostly the same, conceptually, with some stylistic tweaks thrown in, but the main goal is to introduce them to a new generation of kids, who might relate to them in their own way, and then make boatloads of cash. I remember my dad once telling me how weird it was for him when I was a kid and I would be watching reruns of the 80s Alvin and the Chipmunks series. Because he grew up with those characters, and from his point of view, it was bizarre seeing them singing "Girls Just Want to Have Fun" and "Beat It" and stuff. His relationship with the characters changed, where he was viewing them from afar now. No offense to Alvin and his brothers, but even during their reboots in the 2000s, I never had that same feeling because I didn't watch those movies. But this hit me really, really hard when Mutant Mayhem was released. I was a huge Ninja Turtles kid. Some of my earliest kindergarten memories were of drawing Leonardo and his katanas with my crayons, or dressing as a turtle for Halloween. I didn't follow any of their reboots because I had done that already. I was content to leave them behind. But I saw the previews for this and was taken aback. It was like, oh my god, they're Zoomers. They're singing K-pop songs and talking about their Riz. But I ended up seeing it, and I thought it was the most fun movie I'd seen all year. It made me feel incredibly old, but also made me feel like a kid again. By letting familiar characters reboot with the times, it allows audiences the chance to appreciate them from a totally new perspective. Everyone has that experience of growing older relative to the media they once consumed. You know, going from personally relating to Bart wanting to see that movie so badly, to viewing his problem as a memory from your youth. At that point, maybe you're connecting more to Homer's point of view. The Simpsons is an extremely bizarre case because they never went off the air. No hard reboot happened, no radically different art style or spin-off. An entire generation of Bart and Lisa kids grew up to become Homer and Marge in real time, while the show continued to air new episodes. That is ridiculous when you think about it. Those grown-up kids can watch the show today, connecting to Homer and Marge's current day experiences, just like their parents did back in the 90s. Present-day Homer and Marge could theoretically watch a classic Simpsons now and literally say, "Ah, my childhood," in relation to Bart and Lisa. That's really weird. Like, Homer's so old that he could have shoplifted Bone Storm from the Try and Save. If Teen Homer's pizza robots were successful enough, maybe he could have been on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. I bet Homer listened to a lot of Kid Rock in high school. I think it's easy to see these kinds of images and feel instant revulsion, because it's like, oh my god, just cancel the show already. It's been on for so long, and we are so old. Homer plots are currently about out-of-touch elder millennials trying to be stylish, or them fighting it out with fan armies. We liked it better when Homer was our fictional dad symbol, boring us with his boomer music, not navigating our current media hellscape. At the same time, I think it's kind of magical what The Simpsons has created with their timeline. Homer really is a true everyman, that he transcends 3 different generations of experiences. We've seen him weather these same kinds of challenges in so many unique time periods. At the end of the day, does it really matter if Homer liked 70s rock with these guys, or 90s hip hop with these guys? Not really. We tend to like this joke more and accept it as Homer's backstory, but both are true to Homer's music-loving roots, and both will speak to different people throughout time. So many people get to personally relate to a small slice of Homer's history, or his current day struggles. If you're not Homer yet, eventually you will be. Homer comes for everyone. I'm like looking over my shoulder nervously at this point. Also, I apologize for not using Marge more for this main example. Obviously, all these same ideas apply to her as well. I just picked Homer because we know so much more about his backstory. But Marge comes for everyone too. At this point, I kinda hope the show just keeps going and going, just because this dynamic is so completely ridiculous and anachronistic. I want to see what the logical breaking point would be, out of morbid curiosity. Maybe teenage Marge was a big fan of the party posse. Hey, maybe that's what got Homer to join the Navy. The Simpsons are always going to play fast and loose with their timeline. That's just what this show does. Even in 2020, they're doing Stephen King parodies that take teen Homer and Marge back to the 80s, making them Gen Xers again. Honestly, Gen X got kinda screwed over by the writers in the flashback department, so they deserve another turn at the wheel. But generations are kinda stupid anyway. If the Simpsons timeline shows anything, it's that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Kids are always gonna act like silly dorks. Our elders will always yell at clouds. As time marches forward, and the Simpsons continue refusing to die, it's going to be interesting to see how Homer and Marge keep evolving with the times. I think we should celebrate its weirdness and lean into it, even if it makes me feel old. So everyone, look forward to Homer and Marge's TikTok dances someday. I will try not to cringe. As always, thanks for watching.